Welcome to another episode of the Rules of Origin series.
We are here this morning with Roman Bruehwiler, Senior Advisor, Swiss Customs. Can you tell us, Roman, what is the revised Kyoto Convention? Why do we, at the World Customs Organization, why do we need to update it and revise it? What are the talks?
Yes, so the revised Kyoto Convention, or the Convention on the Simplification and Harmonization of Customs Procedures, is the flagship convention of the World Customs Administration. It is the blueprint on how modern customs administrations work, and it contains detailed provisions on customs procedures, rights and obligations of the declarants and authorities.
And we understand, we just had a round table on rules of origin these last 2 days. And we understand, that there is, in this Kyoto Convention, there are many topics and many annexes. In one of these annexes, Annex K, deals with rules of origin. Can you tell us a little bit? Because we understand that the first was done in 1974, then there was a revision in 2000. Now we are in 2020, maybe an opportunity to give it a look again. Is this the issue?
Exactly. So if we look at the Kyoto Convention, as you said, there is the Kyoto Convention of the 1974, which was probably the most significant piece in terms of facilitation and harmonization of customs procedures at the time. So in the late 90s, it was updated and became the revised Kyoto Convention. And during that time, basically the whole convention was reviewed, but in terms of of Annex K on rules of origin, there wasn't much change because at the time in the 90s we had the efforts at the World Trade Organization, the harmonization work program on non-preferential rules of origin. So it was decided we wait with updating the rules of origin of the Kyoto Convention. So now here we are in 2018. We started another revision process, and this has evolved so far, and there is considerable interest from some of the members to review Annex K on rules of origin. So if you look at the landscape in globe in terms of rules of origin, we basically have nothing but what was already there in the 1970s and some basic principles in the Agreement on Rules of Origin. And if we look at the global landscape, it has evolved considerably. Global trade changed, globalization, the way we manufacture and transport goods. Also the way customs work has evolved. We're talking about partnerships, authorized economic operators. We talk about post-clearance audits. We talk about electronic declarations and risk-based control. So a lot has happened, but in terms of rules of origin, we haven't adapted. So here we are, and hopefully this will be, as you said, an opportunity to have a look at this and provide some modern and up-to-date concepts and provisions to facilitate the rules of origin.
Yes, because we understand that worldwide it was expected that the WTO harmonization work program would provide harmonized non-preferential rules of origin. However, the WTO members were unable to come to an agreement, and therefore, as it stands now, we still have no harmonization and not an instrument at multilateral level to govern and discipline the rules of origin. So our hope is that the revised Annex K provides such a kind of guidance. And I think you said that there is a group of countries that have put together a proposal. Can you tell us a little bit more about this group of countries, this coalition of, that has matured in the World Customs Organization? Tell us a little bit more.
Of course. I just would like to come back on the work at the WTO in the harmonization work program. So just on a side note, there is no intent that we use this review process of Annex K as an alternative on what was intended or is still maybe intended at the harmonization work program. So we're not trying to harmonize the rules of origin, but provide a technical, harmonized technical procedures and details around the rules of origin. Now for the sponsoring group, as we call the group of interested countries that would like to have a look at this Annex K, first and foremost, I have to outline the important effort put forward by our colleagues from the European Union. They provided us with a significant document, a concept paper, suggesting an entire redrafting and not only amendment of certain standards of the current Annex K. So this was basically the basis on which all the other members of the sponsoring group, notably Japan, China, New Zealand, Norway, Switzerland, we have international organizations, UNCTAD, we have the Eurasian Economic Commission, and we have representatives of the WCO Private Sector Consultative Group, which are Fonterra and Renault-Nissan. So this entire group is working together and has refined the proposal, which was then accepted in December 2020. And it is now in the process of going to the further steps of the revision process. And yeah, we hope to start developing some specific text proposals to amend the Annex K.
Yes, very good. No, we understand, I mean, that the proposal is aiming, because in World Customs Organization we are talking about standards, recommendation, non-binding guidelines. Can you tell us a little bit more about the content, what the proposals, to give us a little bit more information about the coverage, if, you know, if it extends to administrative aspects of rules of origin, which were not covered by the WTO agreement and are not covered by the WTO agreement on rules of origin?
Yes, of course. So as you mentioned, we have different ways on incorporating provisions in the revised Kyoto Convention. So as you said, there are the binding standards. There is transitional standards, which are also binding for contracting parties, but for which an extended period of time is allowed to implement those. Then we have recommended practices, which are not binding, but which are seen as a way to move towards a harmonization of procedures and basically constitute best practices in this sector. And then a very important aspect is also the guidelines that can be provided to the specific Annex K. So guidelines as well are non-binding, but of course provide an additional means to explain what exactly is the intention of standards, and the provisions in Annex K provide examples to make sure that everybody understands the same of those. So what do we cover in terms of the current proposal? It is really covering almost the whole world related to rules of origin as it is applied in the movement of goods across borders. And also, first, a very important aspect is that it is now intended that we don't only have general rules of origin, as it is now the case, but that there is a distinction made between non-preferential rules of origin and preferential rules of origin. So in terms of non-preferential rules of origin, you mentioned we have the agreement on rules of origin, which offers only some basic principles. And so what the intent is there to provide some provisions to provide more transparency and predictability in the field of rules of origin, where basically at the moment we don't have any multilateral disciplines. So then in the field of the preferential origin, we see that the free trade agreements have exponentially increased, particularly in the 90s. So where, for example, at the time of the Kyoto Convention in the 70s, we maybe had little more than a dozen of free trade agreements. Today we have 300, right? And according to UNCTAD studies, we have almost half of global trade, which is covered by free trade agreements. So in the absence of any harmonization there, of course, every country is free to develop provisions, which has led to the famous spaghetti bowl of rules of origin. So this is a very difficult situation, particularly for economic operators, which have to adapt to a multitude of different rules. And there as well is not only the issue of different rules, but also the different interpretation of those rules. So what we try to achieve there in the proposal is that we have clear concepts and develop what we like to refer to as a common language in terms of provisions on rules of origin, which can be used by negotiators, for example, when they deal with free trade agreements, so that that it is sure that both basically talk about the same thing, that we try to move towards a certain harmonization and avoid a further deterioration of the spaghetti bowl. And yeah, so this is basically the main goal. We provide clear concepts and provisions which can be chosen by the parties, which can be understood from both authorities, regulators, and the private sector, and which facilitate the application of rules of origin in preferential trade.
Yes, but I think that the proposal also contains something that the firms, for the firms, in the sense that the firms are facing day-to-day problems with the proof of origin, supplier declaration, verification. So I understand that the proposal extends also to these aspects, which are very real day-to-day operations. So it will aim at provide common standards and also trade facilitations devices. I mean, we could facilitate the day-to-day transactions of firms.
Absolutely. So there's a wide array of provisions that could be included in this Annex K. Now, of course, all these provisions often are policy choices of countries. So there is some limit to what extent we can agree on binding standards. But in addition to binding standards, we have a variety of other ways. We have the recommended practices, we have the guidelines, and as you mentioned it, we of course would like to cover the certification, the verification, suppliers declaration, issues such as non or third party invoicing, also the use of information technology, transparency, etc. So certainly the intention is there to go to as much detail as it is possible.
So you say the intention are there. When do you think that this intention get to mature? What is the process in front of us?
Well, as I said earlier, we have already achieved to come to a joint proposal. So that's already something. Now we are moving through the process, and the next step, which is starting now, is basically the drafting of specific text to amend the provisions of the revised Kyoto Convention. So we just started now with the general annex, which is the annex which is binding for all the parties. And we will early next year start with the annexes, of which is also, of course, Annex K concerned. So we hope to start this work very soon, and that's basically where the real work will start. And in terms of the whole process, it is the goal to have the revision concluded in 2023.
We hope so, and thank you very much for being with us. We also, as UNCTAD, we also hope that the revised Kyoto Convention on Annex K on rules of origin will come to a fruition. It will be good for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, and looking forward to continue work with you, the sponsoring group, and of course all the other interested parties on this interesting proposal. Thank you.